Welcome back to Everything College. I'm your host, Christina Parker, supporting your college navigation while minimizing debt. If you haven't did so already, make sure you hit that subscribe button and share this video with all the other students out there so they can get this helpful information and make sure they don't miss out on round 3 of the college stimulus. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about literally everything around HERF 3 and giving y'all the breakdown of information so you know what is this, how do I get it, and I have so many questions. I'm probably going to answer those in this video. So please make sure you watch the video from the beginning all the way to the end so you don't miss out on any important information. If you're curious about the second round of HERF, then you can check out all my other videos on my YouTube channel as well. If you have any additional questions, I encourage you to comment them below. All right. So what is the higher education emergency relief funding? So this money came from the American Rescue Plan, okay? Kind of known to a lot of people as the stimulus package through the Biden administration. This is different than HERF 1, which came from the CARES Act, and it also disqualified dreamers, undocumented students, asylum seekers, refugees, and so forth from receiving that money. The second and third round does not disqualify individuals strictly based on their citizenship from receiving this fund. So that means that dreamers, undocumented asylum seekers, and so forth are also eligible to receive this money. All right, so what? You know, institutions got all this money through the American Rescue Plan, right? Which is $40 billion. But of that, 50%, if they were a nonprofit or a private institution, had to go to students. And those that were for-profit institutions had to give 100% to students. So what does this mean for you? This means if you meet eligibility requirements, which we're going to touch on, then you would receive a college stimulus from your school. Then you might ask, well, how much money will I receive? Well, it really just depends. So every student is going to receive a different amount of money, depending on what institution you're at, if you're a full-time student, or if you are a part-time student, or even if you meet eligibility requirements. Those that are ineligible will not receive anything. Those that are part-time will receive less than those that are full-time, and those that are full-time will receive more than those that are part-time. You might ask the question, why is this? So the $40 billion that was put in this huge pot given to institutions, right? Everyone didn't get an equal amount of money. So why didn't they get an equal amount of money? Well, so this money is based on how many students are Pell Grant eligible and also how many students are non-Pell Grant eligible. So based on this, institutions got certain amounts of money depending on how many students that they had that were full-time that were Pell Grant eligible, how many students did they have in general that were Pell Grant eligible, compared to how many students they had that were full-time and just regardless of being full or part-time, that was Pell Grant eligible. So what does this mean? This means that institution A may have gotten $500,000 compared to institution B that may have gotten $20 million. Of the $20 million for this nonprofit or this private institution, for institution B, $10 million has to go to students. For institution A that received $500,000, $250,000 has to go to students. And you probably are starting to get the gist now. So this school right here may have, let's say, 50% of their student population that qualifies than school B. But B got a lot of more money than school A. So regardless of them having less students that qualify from this money, it's not going to be evenly distributed. And those that are at school B are actually going to get more money than students that are at school A. Hope that made that clear. So that means that the students that are at school A may receive, let's say, $100 up into $300, depending on if you're full-time or if you're part-time, and so forth. Compared to University B, whose students may receive $750 up into $1,000, depending on if they're full-time or also if they are part-time. Who can get this money? So any college student that is at a university that has a physical entity. So what do I mean by that? I mean, if your university isn't like Walden University and it's strictly online, then you wouldn't be able to qualify for funds because those universities were deemed ineligible. Now, I will say this, to my knowledge, nothing has changed, but if you do find anything that has changed, please go ahead and comment that below. And if I do find anything that changed, I'll make sure to update this video as well. But those that are in online programs or are distant learning who are at a physical entity and started after March 13th of 2020, or were still enrolled after March 13th of 2020, which was the national thing that happened where everyone had to go distance learning and then you could qualify for this funding. Does this mean that it's only for four-year institutions? And the answer is no. This means that this is for community colleges, private universities, nonprofit universities, and for-profit universities, as long as your school has a physical entity and they receive funding because they had to apply for the first one or the second one if they didn't apply for the first one, and even a third one if they didn't get the first or the second one. If they didn't get the first or the second one. Now, I'm also going to show you all how you can figure out if your university received money and how much money that they received on a later video. But I do have a video that's referring to HERF2 that is actually the same exact process. So I encourage you to go ahead and watch that video, and I will link it here unless you want to wait for part 3. All right, so who qualifies for this money, Christina? That's a little bit complicated. So the money is given to those who have a great need. So what does that mean? This means that institutions get to decide how do they determine if a student has a great need or not a great need, right? And a lot of institutions are focusing on financial aid. Are you financial aid eligible? If the answer is no, then you might not receive any funding because this means that either you had a parent who makes too much money or you yourself makes too much money or so forth. 2, are you someone that's an undergrad? Do you receive a Pell Grant? If you receive a Pell Grant, then you have a higher probability of receiving and being able to qualify for this funding. Are you in a master's program, a PhD program, or a JD program where you do not have a job, you are financial aid eligible, and maybe you receive a lot of loans? Then your institution may deem you as having a greater need, which means that you would also qualify for these funds. If you are someone that is part-time student, right, you have less of a need than students that are full-time, which means that you will receive less money. And I do put quotation marks because I don't think that part-time students have less of a need than full-time students, but some institutions do deem this to be so. Again, institutions do work so differently across the board. So all the information I'm just giving you is kind of generalized, but not every institution is going to work this way. So I do encourage every student out there to reach out to financial aid or to join a student body to be a part of these conversations so you can understand exactly what your institution is doing in particular. So you might ask the question, how much money will I receive? So really just determined by your institution. How much money did they receive? How many students are eligible? And how much money that you should get. I would look at how much money other students got from previous years to get a rough estimate on how much money or the baseline of how much money that you would receive. But students should get between $100 up into $2,500. And I know that's a big window, but unfortunately, every institution just works so differently that I can't give you an exact number. So, this brings me to the next question. Well, how do I apply? So as we've seen with the first round of HERF funding, people had to apply through an application process. When we see in the second one, right, some institutions still did that application process, and then a lot of institutions converted in self-selecting, determining if students were eligible based on their financial aid, and then notifying them that they're going to receive this COVID-19 funding or this emergency relief funding or however they worded it, and then dispense that money to students directly. So now that brings me to the third round. So it's probably going to be a combination of the two, just like previously. And I say probably because I'm just assuming, because I haven't found any information on how schools are going to disseminate this money this round. So you might see your institution actually going ahead and doing another application process. If this is the case, I highly do encourage you to go check out my other video because I do give suggestions on how to increase your chances of actually getting that money. But Regardless, I encourage you to check your email. Your school email is full of important information, and a lot of times we don't check it and we miss out on scholarships and other funding opportunities. And with the second round, I've seen a lot of students who almost missed or did miss the second round of the stimulus check money because they did not check their email and they were not able to put in the application. So set a reminder, make sure you're checking your email as they get closer to fall semester. So yeah, it just really just depends. Will your school send this money directly to you, or will you have to go through an application process? And my best advice to you is to reach out to your institution directly to ask them that question to get more accurate information. All right. So you might also ask the question of, well, what if I recently graduate? Do I qualify? And unfortunately, the answer is no. If you're someone that has recently graduated, you would not qualify for this funding because you will not be enrolled in fall of 2021. You might receive a third round of money if you're taking summer classes, or you should have received the second round of funding if you were enrolled last year, if you met eligibility requirements, of course. I do also want to point out that some institutions deemed individuals who received the first round of HERF as less need for those for the second round. So what did this mean? They prioritized those that did not receive the first round, but also may qualify. And you'll see this in a lot of schools that may have received less money and were able to distribute that all to students. They did not necessarily mean that they got a second round. So you might see something similar with some institutions for this third round as well. So regardless of if you are eligible, you may be ineligible because you did get the second round of HERF funding. But again, I encourage you to reach out to your institutions to ask those specific questions. So when is this money available? So this money is available now all the way into September 30th of 2023. So institutions have until then to utilize all of this funding, which is almost double the amount of the last round of her funding at 23,000, and this is being at 23 billion, and this is being the third round at $40 billion. So you're probably like, well, what can I use this money for? So you can use this money for any component of the cost of attendance. So this means like fees, this means parking, this means etc. that's related to your cost of attendance. You could also use this money for emergency costs that arise due to coronavirus, such as tuition, food, housing, healthcare, including mental health care, and also child care. Now, you're probably like, well, what if I get this money? Like, do I have to send them receipts and so forth? To my knowledge, no institution has required students to provide receipts, and hopefully none do, because that's going to be a huge headache for students and those that are employed at the universities. But if you are doing an application process, you're going to want to speak to utilizing this money specifically for those allowable uses. So if you have a need outside of cost of attendance, emergency costs that arise to coronavirus, such as tuition, food, housing, healthcare, mental health care, and child care, you may not receive that money. So really consider writing to those specific areas. All right. So we're also going to go ahead and jump into some questions that I received from students that are out there from my YouTube channel first, and then we're going to dive a little bit into my TikTok. Someone said, I will start my master's in education this summer. I will take classes online with Grand Canyon University. Will I be able to receive the funds? Now, I will refer back to like my little portion where I talk about eligibility, seeing if you are financial aid eligible, did you receive financial aid? If you're an undergrad, did you get a Pell Grant and so forth to see if you're eligible, right? You could also reach out directly to your institution to also see if you are eligible or not. Lastly, those that receive the first or second round, you may be eligible for the third round as long as nothing has changed. But to answer your questions in particular, the answer is yes. The university or Grand Canyon University did receive HERF 3 funding, which means that all of those eligible students would also receive a third round of this college stimulus in a sense. And I do say college stimulus with quotations because no other school is referencing it as that. But from my opinion, that's pretty much what it is. Someone asked another question is, okay, so what if you are on academic probation? So I highly encourage you, and I hope that you petition your academic probation. And I could do a video for you all to kind of support those that might be going through academic hardships, due to being in, online learning, whatever the case may be during a global pandemic. It's not easy for anyone. And if you would like that information, I highly encourage you to comment that below, and I can make a video specifically for you. But that brings me to my question. Are you financial aid eligible? Do you still have your financial aid package? Have financial aid been revoked from you? And so forth. If financial aid was revoked from you, then you have a less likely of a chance to actually receive this HERF funding, but it really is up to your institution. Are they considering, because you are on academic probation, to have less of a need and therefore prioritizing other students that are in better academic standing? That's really going to be a question that you need to ask directly to your institution, because I could tell you yes or I could tell you no, and it's going to fluctuate throughout different institutions depending on how they have decided to, give money to those that have a greater or less need. I hope that answered your question. Now we're going to jump a little bit into my TikTok. For my TikTok, I have someone that says, I didn't get round two. I got 1 and 3 though. So no one has received round 3 to my knowledge, which means that you're probably referring to round 2 that you actually did receive. But please let me know if that is incorrect information. And I would love to kind of chat with you about that to learn more, because every institution is operating differently. Some institutions may have ran out of HERF2 funding, which means that they utilize HERF3 to maybe give students more money. Or a lot of institutions may still be utilizing HERF2 and waiting until the fall semester in order to disperse HERF3. Someone asked a question of what is this? I hope I did a good job explaining it, but it's kind of like a college stimulus in a sense, where students can get between $100 up into $2,500, depending on if you meet eligibility that I mentioned earlier in this video. Someone said I got $1,600, and you probably did, but it's highly unlikely that you got it from the third round. But again, some institutions could have utilized this money for this year instead of 2, or maybe have even ran out of the second HERF already. I hope that this information was helpful to all of you students that are out there. I also hope that you hit that subscribe button. If you have any additional questions, make sure you go ahead and comment those below. And as always, stay studious.